And I want to say that this is the session that's called Keeping Learners on Track for Success, Pathways and Persistence. If that's not the session that you think you are going to, you should probably get up and go someplace else immediately, because this is what we'll be talking about today. I'm so excited about the discussion that we're going to be having today. We have three absolutely outstanding leaders and scholars to share their thoughts and observations with us, and we're also going to have an opportunity excuse me, at the completion of their presentations for some dialogue and discourse back and forth for any questions or issues that you have to share with us, and perhaps to get some feedback that might be helpful to you. I think those of us who heard Nancy Zimpher just a few minutes ago and the sessions that we heard this morning as well recognize that we have an awful lot of work to do with regards to this completion agenda for non-traditional students in our colleges, our two-year institutions, as well as in our four-year institutions. And for that to happen, we have to collaborate more with each other and coordinate more with each other relative to best practices that can help guide us in better meeting the needs of the students that we're serving. I served for the last 7 years as the chair of the Board of Higher Education for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have 29 institutions of higher education, 15 community colleges, 9 state universities, and 5 branches of the University of Massachusetts. And as Nancy said, we struggled over those years trying to bring people together to reach a common agenda that we could all share with each other with regards to work that we all know that we need to do to increase opportunities for the students that we serve. Our value proposition in Massachusetts was a simple one. We looked at an awful lot of data and analytics, and we determined that the quality of life that we have come to enjoy in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts could not sustain itself if we did not graduate more well-educated, well-trained, and prepared students who could step into the careers and the professions and positions of social responsibility so critical to the future of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so with that as a driving principle, we were able, after a year and a half, to get our campuses to move in a bold way towards a project that we called our Vision Project, which was to raise Massachusetts to one of the highest achieving state public systems of education in the Commonwealth. And I have to say that I'm looking around the room and I see a number of our public institution leaders, and it's great to see you, and they're sustaining that work, and we're making a lot of great progress. So today, I want to emphasize another point that came up in the session earlier. There was somewhat of a false dichotomy about the people who were doing deep, powerful research and the people who are doing the actual practical work on the ground. Today we're going to see a combination of both. An individual who's doing deep, powerful, important, critical research on the success variables and institutional strategies and engagement efforts that are moving the needle on student performance and success. And we're going to also hear from three amazing presidents of institutions that are doing great work, leading on the ground, making substantial differences that are helping our students succeed. We hope at the end of the session, or as the session develops, that these best practices that you're going to hear about and strategies that grow out of research can become part of the vocabulary, part of the narrative that you are using as you're talking with your colleagues and friends about why the work that we need to do has to be sustained, why the work that we are doing needs to be further developed. So let me just say a few words about these wonderful people, and then I'm going to step down to my seat and sit down. I cannot read their whole resumes, because if I did, we'd be here all afternoon. These are high-achieving, wonderful, amazing people. Our first speaker today is going to be Thomas Bailey, who is the George and Abby O'Neill Professor of Economics and Education at Teachers College at Columbia University. I have to give a shout out. My daughter's there doing her doctoral work. She's happy to be in such a wonderful institution, and I know we have another Columbia grad here as well. He's the director of the Community College Research Center and 2 national centers funded by grants from the Institute for Educational Sciences, the Center for Analysis of Post-Secondary Education and Employment, established in 2011, and the Center for Analysis of Post-Secondary Readiness, established in 2014. He is widely published and has a tremendous long list of publications and materials, but most recently, the publication that's been getting an awful lot of attention and a lot of buzz around the nation is his latest book, Redesigning America's Community Colleges, A Clear Path to Student Success. So that is Thomas Bailey to my right. Please hold your applause till I get through everyone. Let me then turn to his right, and we see Diane B. Call is president of Queensborough Community College, an institution highlighted in Tom's book. Her career spans decades at Queensborough and at City University of New York, where she's held positions encompassing virtually all major areas of administration. As I read about her, she's been student-centered learning environments in collaboration with faculty and students, colleagues throughout the curriculum, pedagogical innovations, academic achievements and activities, and as a undergraduate research efforts. She holds as well a doctorate from Columbia University, as well as a number of other degrees. I'm not going to read all of them. Scott Evenbach is the founding president of the new community college at CUNY. It's the Stellar and Charles Gutman Community College. It's a very interesting institution for us to pay attention to and listen to, as it grew out of, was created to be exactly the type of institution that we're talking about today. Its student-centeredness is absolutely critical and vital, and we will hear an awful lot from Scott concerning that. He has his PhD from UNC Chapel Hill and is a distinguished professor, having served in many roles at the University of College at Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. And then, last but certainly not least, let me turn to Mark Rubenstein, who is the president of Granite State College, an innovative public institution within the university system of New Hampshire. 70% of his students are taking courses online, as well as on, how many different sites? 9 sites, I remember the number. 9 sites across the state of New Hampshire, doing innovative and creative things, supporting students in ways that I think we're all going to come to appreciate. Practices from all, I think, that we can all learn from, hopefully adopt, and accelerate the pace of reform that we've heard so much about today. So with that, let me turn it over to Thomas.
All right, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I'm curious, how many of you are from community colleges? Good. And four-year colleges? All right. We're the Community College Research Center, and I think that what we have to say, people think is mostly about community colleges, but I think what I have to say today really applies to four-year colleges as well, especially maybe not the top most elite R1 colleges, but four-year colleges. I actually normally my job today I think is a lot easier than it usually is, because so far this morning I've heard almost all the points I wanted to make. Certainly Donald Lindemann's discussion of ASAP, the Chancellor Zinfer's, so that's, and also since I usually end my talks with a bunch of examples, but actually we have those examples here, President Call and President Evenbach. So I don't really have to say anything, although I'm an academic, so I can't shut up. So I will say something. This book we wrote, Redesigning America's Community College, and I think it's important to think about that community colleges especially were set up primarily to provide access to many people to higher education. They're open access. They don't have entrance requirements, et cetera. And I think we have to admit that they have been very successful at doing that. They were set up to do that. They've done that. I know we feel like we're the 13th or whatever it is in the world as far as the number of people with degrees. But most of our high school graduates do go to college at some point in 10 years after that. And I think that community colleges can take credit for that, or much of the credit for that. Now, about 10 or 15 years ago, we sort of started to be dissatisfied with just the question of access. There's a lot of reasons. If you want to talk about it, I've got in our book, we have a whole discussion of why there was a shift from access to success. But nevertheless, I think that we can talk about the importance of the success or the completion agenda. And maybe that started 15 years ago. And so one thing we heard this morning was that if you look at the number of students who have post-secondary degrees, we've increased it by a couple of percentage points in the last few years. We've had a tremendous amount of reform taking place over the last decade or 15 years. And nevertheless, despite that, we don't see the needle moving, either across the sector as a whole or in cases in many types of institutions. So we started out, why was that? It's not that people don't want to reform. It's not that faculty aren't dedicated to this. It's not that there's not imagination. It's not that there's not funding for these types of reforms. What happened? So that was really the question that we had. So there were two kind of observations that first of all, there was a lot of reforms, and one of them was sort of flavor of the month. I'm sure all your colleges are sort of sick of this is the next thing that's come along. We've heard about some of that this morning. And those didn't seem to change what was happening in colleges, despite the fact that in many cases there was evidence that they worked, in the sense that students that went into those programs actually did better. So in that sense, there was evidence that they worked, but they didn't actually change the institutional averages. That was one thing. And then we also observed that colleges weren't actually operating the way that we expected them to do. So I'll talk a bit about that. So one problem was simply the size. Why didn't a lot of reform generate bigger changes? Well, one was the size. If you have a 200-person learning community, do a random assignment study of that, you show that those students actually do much better than the control group, but you have 20,000 students in your college. It could be fabulous, and it's going to be rounding error, even less than rounding error in the institutional average. So that was one thing. Now, generally, the idea of having a pilot and scaling it has not worked. Now, we're hoping that at ASAP that does work, and it looks like there's a lot of progress to be made, but it's really going against a history of difficulties in that sense. And one of the problems with the pilot program is that it often takes away your most innovative faculty. The reform-minded faculty are off on the side working on their grant-funded project. It doesn't have any influence on the rest of the way that the college operates. So that was one issue. So that's sort of so that's what I call horizontal scaling. The other one is vertical scaling, and I think maybe this is a point which actually has been emphasized. Donna emphasized this a lot. A lot of these reforms only dealt with one segment of the student's experience. This is maybe the most important thing I want to say today. We did a series of learning community studies. Those tended to be effective in the sense that they put people, these were for developmental ed students, they put students into college level courses at a higher rate than the control groups. But if you followed those students over 2 or 3 years, those benefits faded. So as far as graduation rate was concerned, those were not better than the control group. So that's a crucial question. Two things, too small and also too limited in the range of things that they're doing. Now, this is just a kind of an image of what we're dealing with. Now, this is a diagram. I know it's complicated, and my staff hates me to use it, but I'm addicted to it. Think of a student as a slice, as a horizontal slice, and this is a picture of how our institutions are set up. The orange is a full-time student, and those you see 2 semesters. The blue, you might go part-time for the summer, and then you have 2 more semesters. That's the way we're set up. We're called 2-year colleges. You expect students to go for 4 semesters and complete. Maybe they'll take a couple of courses in the summer. This is from a sample of 14,000 students, and about 250 students followed that path. So obviously it's not. Now this is a picture of what the students are. Now, once again, think of these as 14,000 slices, right? So that's what these students are. So they all start out as full or part-time, but immediately that falls apart. They switch to full-time, they go to part-time. The blank spaces is when they're not there, and the dots are when they transfer. So while we think we have a 2-year institution, actually, this is the way students are actually experiencing. So one question is, why is that? Now, then there's transfer. So transfer, we have lots of students in community colleges. If you ask students, most of them say they want to transfer and get a bachelor's degree. 25% transfer. Now, these are data from the National Clearinghouse in 5 years. 20% of the transfers earn awards before they transfer. So that's one question. Why is it that so many students, the majority of our transfer students, transfer before they complete an associate's degree? Is that the way we've designed it? And then, of course, 17% actually get a bachelor's degree. So we start out with 80, and we end up with 17%. Now, it shows you the distribution of credits that students have when they transfer. Why is that? So you can see there's that peak in the middle is the 60 credits. So it's not meaningless. But there's an awful lot of students who transfer before. Now, why is that? Well, if you don't have a very well-organized program that you're in your community college, if those credits don't transfer, it may be in the best interest of the students to transfer early. So let's make sure that that's not an issue. Now, of course, why is it that their students getting 80, 90, et cetera? There are many colleges, and I'm sure some of you here, where the typical associate degree student has many more than 60 credits. So here we have a picture of a system that's not very well organized. Remember, it was set up to promote access, to get people to enroll in courses and let them do that. I think a fundamental point is that that design may not be the optimal design for getting them to complete. Okay, now this is the general education requirements. I'm sure that in your colleges they're much easier to understand than this. Somebody said this morning about how we give students lots of options and you're supposed to come. And remember, at community colleges, students aren't coming in with a lot of social capital behind them. Their parents didn't go to college, their brothers and sisters and all the people in their high schools aren't going to college and giving them this information. I mean, community college environment is more complex than the environment of the students where I teach at Columbia University, the undergraduates. It's much simpler, fewer degrees. Community colleges have many programs, they have certificates, and if you want to transfer, it's that much more complicated, right? I mean, I think in New York you can take a subway to 20 four-year colleges. So which one of those do you focus on? So now, of course, we don't have a CUNY, I forget what the ASAP number is, 1 out of 150. I mean, typically we have 1,000 students for each advisor, and so students are left to online advising. Now, I suggest that you go back to your colleges. If we had an hour or two, I'd have you do this right now. Ask a question. I have these credits, I'd like to transfer. Go to your website and see if you can answer those questions. What courses will be accepted when I move? Where should I move, etc. I think in general, when we do that exercise, it's an eye-opening exercise. So what do we have with transfer? So there's a confusion about programs. Transfer credits count only as electives often, right? So you've taken the accounting course in the community college, but it won't count to the accounting degree when you go to the four-year college. And many decide on margins on majors that are too late. There's just a lot of information that's needed, and it's often inaccurate. I mean, even if you have more advisors, the complications that they need to know are simply overwhelming, and they can't really keep up with that. So generally, if you think about what we call sort of the pathway analysis, chaotic student enrollment patterns, that's what I showed before. Pathways are misaligned, they're roadblocks, students say that they're confused. So they're lost in a maze. So what are the sort of way outs of this? So I think one of the things that's been very influential has been the behavioral economics. You know, we know this, so we have 401ks, and somebody says, here are your 10,000 stocks, go to it, right? When somebody says that to me, I leave my money in the bank, right? If you say, here are 3 portfolios, low risk, middle risk, high risk, I'm going to invest in one of those. I mean, I'm sure some of you are stock pickers and want to devote your time to doing that. But generally, we don't do well with that kind of massive complexity in decisions. And frankly, traditionally in community colleges, we've used the 1,000 stock model rather than the 3 portfolios model. So that's really the sort of model that we have with the guided pathways notion. So I'll talk more about that. So we sort of, in the book, we talked about what we call the cafeteria model. Tons of stuff are available at community colleges, but it's up to the student to actually navigate through that. And once again, a student that, 1, doesn't have a lot of help from the counseling and advising staff just because of resources, and 2, doesn't come in with a lot of sophistication or other family resources that they can call on to answer those questions. There's limited upfront career and college planning. This is something that Donna talked about, that students want. Generally, our career planning happens at the end when somebody is done. So then you go down to one of those mobile offices at the edge of the campus and talk to them about career planning. Too many choices. Requirements are confusing. The paths are unclear, poorly aligned to their end goals. Developmental education, I could give a 2 or 3 hour talk about the issues of developmental education, but it's not effective in terms of getting students solidly established into their college level program. Students' progress is not monitored. There's limited ongoing feedback and support. We know there's a lot of work going on this. And then we talked, actually this morning it was talked about, what about the issue of early, that is connection to the high schools or connection to feeder institutions. All of those things are not very well organized. And if you can think of the sort of the college, the guided pathways model is just the opposite of that. Career college goal setting from the start. Required plans are used in default program maps. Now, I'm happy to talk more about the notion of default programs. Actually, I think Larry Abely is here at this conference, and I think he's in the next session. And I suggest that you go here because he's certainly talked a lot about that. Exploratory majors for undecided. I mean, it makes a huge difference whether a student knows what they want or whether they don't have a clue. So a crucial question about the intake system is not just to provide some assistance in math and English, but to help those students figure out what program they want to be in. And now President Evan Beck has a very sophisticated system for doing that, and I'm sure we can hear more about that. So the question is, if a student can't decide the narrow goal that they have, then perhaps we can put them in broad goals, health, and have an actual coherent curriculum for students in a health program that will help them decide, do they like health? And within health, what specific occupation do they want? Predictable schedules, academic support is integrated into program gatekeeper courses. So this is a crucial question. Intake, as I said, needs to be not just, here's an assessment, you failed, here's a math course. It has to be a process that gets students firmly established into their college level program, which means they have to choose which one that is. So I think that's a crucial question, and we need to have better progress tracking and feedback support. So let me just say we sort of think about this as 4 big ideas for college redesign. One is mapping paths to student end goals. I'll talk a little bit about this. Is a crucial question. Are our college level programs organized in the most coherent, effective way possible? When you think about college level programs is the main thing we provide to our students. How much reform has actually focused on that? Now, the discussion that we had this morning about learning outcomes and how to measure those, et cetera, I think that's an important aspect about that. But this is a crucial question. And then something else to emphasize is that we're talking about college level programs, not courses, right? So we can look at learning outcomes. I'm a professor, right? I don't want anybody to interfere with my course. So the accreditor comes along and says, figure out the program level outcomes. And, so I sort of roll my eyes and we get together and we come up with those outcomes which actually teach the exact courses, the things that we're teaching in our courses now. So we have to overcome that, right? We have a course-centered thinking. We need to have a program-centered thinking. We have to think about helping students get on the path. That's the thing I talked about with intake. We have to keep students on that path. I guess that was the name of this thing, and I think I can talk a lot about that, but perhaps we could talk about that in the discussion. But certainly part of that is if you have a coherent program, then you know what that is. It's difficult to keep someone on a path if it's confused and not well organized to begin with. And many of our general studies programs, I think, are like that. And then finally, ensuring that students are learning. So once again, those are 3 big ideas that we have about that sort of as a framework. And notice this is a framework that takes into account the entire student experience. Now I'm not going to these are some examples that I could talk about. This is the Chicago City Colleges. I'm not going to talk about that because we've heard a great example this morning from ASAP, and we're going to hear about 2 other examples. I'm happy to talk about Chicago if you'd like to. These are just some examples of guided pathways. You see that it's not just about community colleges. As a matter of fact, 4-year colleges have really been pioneers in this area. We're going to hear about Queensborough, about Gutman. We heard this morning about ASAP. Once again, I just want to re-emphasize the issue, and I think ASAP is a great example of that, of how it's important to have reform which looks at the entire student experience. Okay, so just because I think the question about clarifying the path and establishing the college level course is a crucial issue. Let me give you a little bit more thought about that. So here's questions. Are our programs well designed to prepare students to enter further education and employment in fields of importance to our region? That's one question. How clearly are our programs mapped for our students, especially for the common transfer institutions? Okay, so once again, I think the transfer issue is a crucial question, very complicated, and students need a lot of help with that. Do students know what courses they should take and in what sequence? I think in many cases, well, of course, in many cases, if they can take any course, it's not that well defined. I don't know exactly how to answer that question. And then, are courses critical for success in each program clearly identified? So if you screw up in this course, you're not likely to be successful in this program. Do students know that? But do we let them keep going, thinking what they're doing without the help that they're needed? So that's that's one question. That's one issue. Where we've often started with this is asking about the college level program and is it well defined? The second one, to go back to the issue about the entire student pathway and really start and work this backwards. What's the ultimate goal that the student has, either subsequent education or employment? And so really you can start here, right, with completion and work backwards, rather than, I think most of the time we start with Dev Ed because that's where most of our students are. Let's fix up Dev Ed, and then we hope that will work. So you can see that these are all types of the completion, progression, entry, and connection. I think those are steps, but you can't do everything at once. But if you have a reform, how does it integrate into all of these different other questions? So the sort of the three takeaways, I mean, there's many things that in this, but these are the three things I want to re-emphasize. Restructure, taking account of the entire student experience, not just a segment, crucial. Build reform around simplified and coherent program level, college level programs of study, including transfer. And the third is redesign intake with the goal of helping students choose and successfully enter a college level program of study. Now, there's a lot of different elements of that, but I think these are three very important issues that I don't think have received enough attention in the reform movement that's been taking place. Okay, that's really what I have to say. I hope we can have discuss these in more detail later. Thank you.
And, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to suggest that we keep all of our thoughts in mind, different 2, 3 speakers at this point. Then we can ask our questions collectively to the 5 panel. Let us now turn to Ian Powell, president of Queensborough, an institution that's doing some very, very important work, preparing students for colleges and for transfer and beyond.
There you go. Well, hello, good afternoon. Queensborough is part of the City University of New York, which is comprised of 24 institutions. If you were in Donna's session this morning, you'll know that we are an integrated university, a federated university, and I'm one of 7 community colleges. My colleague here joins me. For us, we have a lovely campus, 34 acres, so we're kind of suburban looking, but we have over 16,000 students, 2,000 of whom are probably high school students taking college courses in a variety of collaborative programs. We have about 8,000 students in continuing education, which is important to us because we're making inroads there into pre-collegiate relationships with high schools. And that to me is very, very important because we receive New York City public high school graduates largely for Queensborough. Our students are young, they're right out of high school. They come from 139 countries and speak 87 languages and dialects. They are represented 30% Hispanic, 26% Asian, 26% Black, 18% white. We have 30 academic programs, including 9 dual joint degree programs, which are official dual joint admission programs with our sister colleges in CUNY, senior colleges. And for us, that's a very important incentive because we are overwhelmingly a transfer institution. More than 80% of our students do go on, whether they're in AA or AS or the AAS. And actually in New York, with increasing oversight of AAS programs, some of our departments are beginning to look at converting over to AS for a variety of reasons. But we do have wonderful faculty. And many people will talk about the various services that are available, and I'm just going to focus a little bit more on faculty today, in addition to our advisement system and some other wonderful features. We have 398 full-time faculty, and we have about 500 adjunct faculty. These colleagues, and they are extraordinarily talented. We've probably hired 100 plus in the last 3 to 4 years. We require a doctorate or terminal degree for tenure track positions. We have a very rigorous screening process, but we also have a very demanding workload. We have 27 hours. We require research, publications, teaching. We're a teaching institution, but it is a highly competitive environment for our faculty. What has made, I think, our success with high-impact practices, which is really pedagogical approaches to student success, has been, I think, the ability to hire faculty and to look for faculty with experiences in innovative pedagogy. So it was very important for us. We do give 24 hours of contractual time over the first 5 years for our untenured faculty to assist them, again, with their publications, their research and publications. But when we hire them, they come with that, generally speaking. Our characteristics that we search for, certainly innovation, high-impact practice experiences, assessment, grants, evidence of collaboration. That's very important for us because when we are working with students and we're working with faculty, it's important to go interdisciplinary, as we do, and go through teamwork. Queensborough is noted for very rigorous academic programs, a very strong and engaged faculty, a focus on pedagogical research and faculty development to create a student-centered learning environment. It really is an important element that we all work together to create an opportunity for students to feel connected, to be supported, and to experience a variety of things, as Dr. Bailey said, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. So we began with a program, as many people do, with advisement. But we decided in 2009 to offer all first-time, full-time freshmen a chance to be part of what we call the virtual community, the academies, based on where they wanted to study, 5 areas at the time. We began to scale up, and in 2013, all of our full-time students are part of academies, which means they have an academic advisor that's with them from admission to graduation. We have more than 75 full-time advisors. Now, ASAP is part of what we do. ASAP, the ratio is 150 to 1. For most of our advisors, it's more like 450 to 500 to 1. So we need to do more than just advisement, as Dr. Bailey indicated. Our academies were really meant to give students a sense of connection, but they're a partnership. Student affairs, academic affairs, and the common thread would be our faculty. So we really have intentional intrusive advisement. We use technology. We have to reach that many students. We're very fortunate to have a very strong system for early alert, for degree works where students can track if they're on their own, which we try not to let them be on their own. They can actually follow what they've taken and how it applies. They can query, if I change my major, how much of that material would go with me to the new major. We have an extensive website where students can check to see if they went on to CUNY, what they would be accepted in terms of the transfer credit. Transfer credit's huge, huge. But I think the difference for Queensborough has been a huge investment in high-impact practices. And it's a unique element, I think. We follow the AAC&U model. We've been declared a roadmap institution. And it really is a chance for faculty on a voluntary basis. This is really key. On a voluntary basis, the faculty take the lead to peer mentor other faculty members in instructional strategies that are very effective. We've chosen 7. There are many, but we've chosen 7, and they really do spur student engagement. The whole goal of our high-impact practices is active learning. We really have to get the students involved. Another point made by Dr. Bailey in his latest book. So it really facilitates student learning skills and competency beyond just providing content. It was really, really important. We have many benefits we've seen so far. We're ramping up. We have student retention is improved, academic performance and credits earned have increased, and timely graduation. It's an uphill battle with community college students. As Dr. Bailey indicated, many of them are first-time college attendees. They may not have all those supports that many people take for granted going into a higher education institution. But for our faculty, and the key is there, they have voluntarily embraced this. We did not touch curriculum. They deliver their courses, but they use instructional support strategies such as writing intensive, academic service learning, which has proven to be hugely successful, learning communities, collaborative assignments and projects that use multimedia, and often will involve 2 or 3 different faculty working with students. The common intellectual experience, such as the common read, and undergraduate research, for which we are a national model. We have one of the most powerful set of faculty in the sciences that you would ever want to assemble, and they've done great work with our students who presented probably in the last 5 or 6 years, 1,000 students have presented posters at national and regional conferences and even contributed to articles by our faculty. So it's very impressive. We also have global and diverse learning and diversity, and that has been interesting because obviously we have an international student body. So how do we put these together? Because it is not easy with all of the requirements and workload of faculty to get them engaged. So we really support faculty development very strongly. We have faculty leaders. We invest in terms of their leadership with reassigned time, et cetera. We include that consideration in hiring, in reappointment, and in tenure. And the alignment of faculty engagement in innovative pedagogy is very, very important. And we also equate pedagogical research, the scholarship in that pedagogical research, as equivalent to research in the discipline, so that we have now reinforced the message that this is something that is very beneficial for our students, and it is in fact valued by the college, by the faculty, and certainly by the students who succeed very well. We have many levels of review when we hire a faculty member, and at each level, whether it be the provost, the president, I try to interview all the finalists, I do, it's important that we stress the things that we hold dear, which would be obviously teaching, scholarship and research, but innovation in pedagogy. We have extensive faculty orientation programs. They go a year long for the first year, and we maintain a series of activities and mentorship, faculty to faculty. We have a Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, which is important. And we give significant support, several $100,000 a year, for faculty to go out to conferences to present the results of their pedagogical research, their innovative teaching, and that has been important. We also, again, for faculty who were hired a number of years ago, who may not have the opportunity for having contractual reassigned time, we've established a presidential fellowship for mid-career faculty to re-engage them in many ways, providing them with reassigned time, with a mentor to work on research and support through our Center for Teaching and Learning. So, what have we learned, or what have been the outcomes? I think it's been very important to see those gains in student retention, student performance, graduation. It's also, we've seen higher pass rates, particularly in English and psychology. The high-impact practices can include students in developmental education. Initially, there was resistance to that because they were seemed to be outside the ability to participate, and in fact, that is the group of students on whom this has the greatest impact. So it's really very important. We do see among the various high-impact practices, learning communities, academic service learning, and common intellectual experiences as drawing the greatest percentage of students who really will persist. They really do take front and center in this kind of activity. So last year, 313 individual faculty engaged in high-impact practices, and 2 years ago, we had 27 folks make presentations. Last year was 47. So we're going full bore. And it's up to 145 presentations this year. So I think it's very important. We have had faculty write articles, write books, participate all over. We have other colleges who come to visit with us. We're very happy to do that, or to go to them to talk about these sorts of things. And I think that that is, for us, one of the keys. I won't even talk about remediation because it is a horror. In New York City, with 1.1 million students, 25% of those students are in schools that are deemed by state ed as failing. So that's a very hard situation to deal with. So we've really worked very hard to go with pre-admission, to work strongly with the students who are thinking about college, with their families in particular. So, and we also have established a partnership with the New York City Department of Ed to create, along with SAP, a corporate partner, a version of P-TECH, but we call it B-TECH because it's business and technology. And what's interesting there is these students, and they're in their sophomore. We have two cohorts now. They're quite lovely. We work with them. They come to our campus. But most importantly, our faculty and their faculty are working very closely on the development of curriculum at the high school level to really to incorporate the things that they will need to know, to learn, to be able to accomplish when they're in college. And for us, that's a very interesting experience. So I thank you for this time. I'll move on.
Thank you very much. So we're going to turn to Scott Evan back now to bring us up to speed on the newest community colleges in the country.
Good afternoon. The former chancellor of CUNY and Mayor Bloomberg decided that they wanted to start a new college, and they hadn't started one in over 4 decades, and started New Community College, whose home is at 50 West 40th Street, right on Bryant Park, behind the New York Public Library. I invite you all to Bryant Park in the holiday time. It's wonderful. We opened our doors on August 20, 2012. The mayor and the chancellor came in the morning. The students came in the afternoon for opening convocation, and the accreditors came in the later afternoon. So it's a day that I won't forget. The next year, CUNY gratefully accepted a $25 million gift from the Stella and Charles Gutman Foundation. The board wanted the legacy of the Gutmans to live on in New Yorkers, and so they endowed the college. The funds are used only to support student learning. Some foundational elements of the college are that Kay McClenny, when she looked back at the CESI, said first generations students don't do options, that they need to have structured pathways. When they look back at achieving the dream, they said you should take everything to scale. Well, our scale is not very big yet. We're not as big as the big English department, but all of our students do everything that we do, and we have a very much of a guided pathway. Tom and his colleagues launched their book at our college, and before the talk I said, Tom, I just read the book, and I just think you're a little bit heavy-handed, that not everything is good about guided pathways and everything is bad about cafeterias. And after a 5-minute talk, I was convinced he was right. And I urge you to read that book if you haven't read it. A group of people across CUNY, including Donna and 200 other people, worked on a concept paper laying out how we would do our new college, and it was all based upon our students. CUNY had this new college because it wanted a second new community college in Manhattan, and because the enrollments are increasing. And like the other community colleges, we're primarily young students. And if I had a slide, I didn't bring slides today, it would be a slide of pictures of our students. They're young, they're 56% Hispanic, 25% African American, 9% Asian, 9% Caucasian. They're very much low income. 40% have family incomes $20,000 or less. They're the least prepared of the students on any community college campus at CUNY. If you use the admissions index, the most at risk financially, if you use Pell eligibility, half don't speak English at home. And this new college decided to try this with having a new model. My friend Adam Bush over here and some of his colleagues wrote a concept paper, which they call the Catalyst paper, which I couldn't recommend to you more highly. They said you're not going to get different results if you don't do the work differently. So we do the work very differently. The students come in the winter before to an information session, and we tell them how if you come here, you're going to have to go full-time. CUNY community college students, beginners, generally 89% are full-time anyway, so that's not a stretch. But they come to that information session in the winter. We're doing those already for next year, saying this is what our college is going to be like. You need to think about whether this is going to work for you. You're not going to have any choices here. We only have 5 majors. Then they come back to a second information session, and we say, did you hear what we said? And so I think if every college did that, if every college had students come the winter before, the first year we all did it, you'd see at least a 5% jump in retention, because we all have this thing, well, we are so student-oriented, we let them add classes up until 2 weeks after classes have started. Well, you know what, they're never back. And so we need to do the work differently. We're not serving them well if we don't have them on a thought process before they come, thinking about how they're going to do college. So they come to the information sessions, then we have monthly gatherings, and then we have orientation, and then we have Bridge. That's a 2-week Robin Hood funded program where it's partly academic, but it's more social emotional. They're all in a 25-person cohort group with an instructional team, and they get to know one another. So when classes start, they know that they're people who like them, who they are like. And so when on the first day of classes, it's not one of these deals where they were told, well, you know, pick 5 classes and maybe one of them will be your major, and good luck picking the classes, and remember to give yourself enough time to get between classes. Instead, like in ASAP, they come to our place, and they come in the morning or they come in the afternoon with the same cohort group, and they all take the same thing. They take city seminar, which in the fall, AAC&U has to do a big picture topic, so they do sustainability in the fall and immigration in the spring, and the reading and the writing and the quantitative reasoning are all threaded through it, so there are no separate courses. They just have more time on task. They take a course called Ethnographies of Work, which is a combination of anthropology and sociology. They do an ethnography of a career they might be interested in their first semester, a real one with a real ethnography textbook, and do an incredibly good job with that. They then load that in their electronic portfolio. They're allowed to say what their major is going to be in their second semester, and then move into one of 5 programs. We use the degree qualification profile for the learning outcomes, heavy reliance on that electronic portfolio to record their work with signature assignments and a capstone at the end. A couple of the other CUNY campuses have weird calendars. They go 12 weeks and 6 and 12 weeks and 6, and I thought that was, so if you didn't make enough progress in the 12, you could catch up in the 6. That's part of it, but the more important part of it is they go year-round without paying tuition more than the 2 semesters. So spring 2 is everybody else's summer. So spring 1 plus spring 2 is how we organize the curriculum. And we have this anomalous result that our FTE is 1.3 bigger than our head count, which is not the normal ratio because the students are accumulating so many hours, and that propels them to graduation. So in the middle of the 2 longer semesters, we have assessment days when the faculty get together to work on assessment. They all teach in instructional teams anyway, and the teams meet every week to talk about what they're teaching that week, interdisciplinary assignments. Faculty tell me that's by far the most professional development they've ever had, because they're talking about particular students and how to do this work. Then the 2 assessment days, while the faculty are doing that, the students are out having community days. We have a lot to learn from Ann and her colleagues, but we too really stress high impact practices. The students are running around collecting data in the city all the time. They do a project on a neighborhood in the Bridge, and I think they do really high quality work. We're now up to 823 students. We want to get to 5,000. The only thing standing in our way is a new building, but we have high hopes that we will be moving to a new building. The retention rate is 70 to 75% 1 year. We've only had 1 class graduate, but that was 49% in 3 years, 28 in 2 and 49 in 3. The second cohort, the 2-year graduation rate was 30. About 90% of the graduates go on to senior colleges, and I don't keep in touch with all of them, but I keep in touch with some of them. and two of them that I keep in fairly good touch with. One went to Fordham and the other to Hunter, and they'll both graduate in May. So 4-year graduation rate starting at a community college. So it's exciting to be able to work with these students.
Now we're going to shift to Mark, who's going to talk a bit more about what he's doing with adult learners. Coming back, although he doesn't work exclusively with adult learners, he serves a significant number of them.
Thank you. Actually, I was recognizing before I got here that I was going to be the outlier in this group, and the longer I sat, the more to the outside I felt. But I'll give you a little bit of quick background. I've been at Granite State College now for 6 months after spending about 30 years at very traditional residential institutions. And so for me, working with adult students is a bit of a new experience. The median age of our undergraduates is almost 35. 70% of our students report that they're working full-time while they're in school. Another 17% report that they're working part-time while they're in school. So to a large degree, our students are primarily in the workforce, largely in New Hampshire. I say largely because although we have 9 physical locations around the state of New Hampshire, 70% of our instruction is actually online, and so we have an increasing number of students who are elsewhere in the country and in some cases elsewhere in the world. Now, a little bit of quick background for Granite State College, established 43 years ago within the university system of New Hampshire to serve primarily adult students, to provide access to affordable, quality higher education. In the 43 years that the college has been in place, we've now had 4 different names. And recently I had a survey done in the state of New Hampshire just to test our visibility, which is modest. Turns out that our previous name, which has been extinguished for the past decade, is still almost as well known as our current name, which didn't give me as much comfort as I had hoped. But it gives you a little bit of background for who Granite State College is. I've talked a bit about our students' age, working condition. About 30% of our students in any year are coming to us from the community college system. And among the university system of New Hampshire schools, the community college system of New Hampshire sends a larger number of students to Granite State than to any of the other 3 residential institutions. Having said that, the students who come to us, 2/3 of them are part-time students, which is more likely to be part-time than is true while they're enrolled in the community college system, represents a higher proportion of part-time students. So in some respects, those students who find us seem to be the students with the greatest interest in the flexibility of being part-time students. Our faculty, masters required, many with terminal degrees. What characterize our faculty, virtually all of them are adjuncts. Working professionals working in their respective fields who also enjoy teaching, also appreciate the opportunity to do that. In many cases, a lot of our faculty are actually former Granite State students, and so they understand who our students are, but they also bring the perspective of what the workforce in their respective disciplines, in their career fields, is looking for. And it provides a level of attachment or connection for our students that we think is beneficial. We currently have 30-degree programs. Not quite the 5 that Scott described. I don't think we have quite that discipline yet to bring it down to 5. But in any given term, we're teaching about 230 classes. And of those 230, it's actually 30 that account for roughly half of the enrollment of our students. So what it allows us to do is to concentrate attention, not that we ignore the other 200 classes, but knowing that there are some narrow channels through which most of our students are going to pass, it allows us to focus a lot of energy and a lot of attention on the learning outcomes of those courses, on the work that faculty do to help students learn how to be successful students as they progress through the curriculum. A couple of specific examples that I can offer. Crit 502 is a course that we require of all of our students, even if you've transferred in with an associate's degree. It's a critical inquiry course, but it's tied to a particular discipline. And what we're really trying to do with that course is help the student individually navigate between who they are and where they are when they've come to us. And given the background of our students, they come with a broad mix of prior learning experiences, transfer credits from myriad institutions, military service, other kinds of life experiences. So to try and ground that student with who she or he is what the curriculum is that they're pursuing, what the career objective is. That course is our attempt to try and help make sure that that student has a solid footing moving forward, regardless of what they've brought in as far as transfer courses. One of the other tools that we're working with, and again, keeping in mind that 70% of our instruction online, we use Moodle as our platform. I'm agnostic about what the platform is, but we've got a terrific team of instructional designers building course shells for each of these courses to be clear about learning objectives, to be able to look at the assessment that goes with that, to ensure that students are getting out of the courses what they should. But one of the other particular tools that we've started to use is the ability to observe the interaction. And I'm not talking about the content. I'm not trying to infringe on the correspondence or the exchange between student and faculty, but to simply see the level of engagement. How involved are faculty in working with students? How involved are students in responding? Gives us some early warning tools to be able to work with students to identify when students are losing ground quickly, that they're not engaged with classes. Is it a technical issue that we can help solve quickly, or is there something else going on in a student's life that's potentially a barrier to success? For us, advising is a critical part of this process, and I will tell you that for us, in terms of staffing, advising and admissions, it's a continuum, a professional continuum, and I'm not talking about this in terms of sales. I'm really talking about this in terms of student development. When we're working with students, it's often the case that students' first attachment might be through an admissions officer, but the work that they are doing with that student to figure out what they are bringing with them through prior experience, through military service, what their aspirations are, sometimes creates that bond. So working between the admission staff and the advisors, we are trying to make sure that there's a strong bond that helps frame that student's experience, that we don't lose track of why a student has come to us. In most cases, it's to complete a degree, but in other cases, it actually serves a very specific structural need in their lives. They need to improve their writing for work, or they're trying to gain a certain amount of knowledge or competency around a particular life or work challenge that they have. So to be clear on what that expectation is, to make sure the advisor is working closely with them so that course selection and support are appropriate. A couple of other things that I would mention. Partnerships are crucial for us. Most of our students are part of their communities, and I don't mean that in a superficial way. I mean, most of our folks as adult learners are in the fabric of their communities. It shows up interestingly in a lot of their capstone projects that have a community service orientation, even if it wasn't initially an expectation. One of the things that we are trying to do is get better at building those partnerships. Community college system is one of the places, again, not only because it's a source of a significant number of students, but in many cases, the community colleges are places that can better serve some of our students, at least at certain stages in their careers. So to make sure that we're not so covetous of the enrollment that we're choosing to bring a student in when we could actually be partnering better on behalf of that student and aligning our interests and their interests more effectively. Employers, in some of the locations where we have, you can find large employers, and I won't name names, but for instance, when you hear that one of the challenges to enrollment for students who want to do face-to-face or even synchronous online is that work schedules, that work schedules are sometimes fluid so that a student can't consistently attend a particular class. What is the barrier to our reaching out to an employer to talk about, here's what our schedule looks like during this 12-week window for those students who happen to be your employees? Can you hold their schedule stable so that they can have Tuesday nights consistently available? Can we do that on behalf of our students? And by the way, can we do that on behalf of your workforce to benefit the community? Working with the military, in any given term, about 15% of our students are coming from the military. How can we do a better job of serving? One of the goals that we have as a public institution is to be a good partner to other public service agencies, and for that matter, community service agencies. Knowing that there's a significant number of students who come to us through the military, how can we do a better job of valuing their experience through appropriate awarding of credit, appropriate flexibility, appropriate financial aid policies, and tuition policies that align properly with VA benefits to be sure that students are getting maximum value from the service that they have given to the country. So that's a little bit of background about Granite State College.
I'm sorry, suggest that we open the session up to any questions, comments, observations that you might have derived from listening to our three speakers or from listening to Professor Bailey's work on his book. Do we have any folks who have any, even amongst our presenters, if you'd like to ask one of the other presenters a question, that would be perfectly okay as well.
Okay, I have a question. As far as the, I mean, so both of you talked about the limited, I mean, you had 5 majors. How many academies do you have?
5.
So I mean, maybe you could say a little bit more about a student. I mean, does that mean that there's a bunch of students who arrive who you can't serve? And then how is it that what process do you use for helping them to figure out which one of those either academies or majors they'll go into?
Well, we have everybody take the same thing, and one of the public policy things that I get troubled by sometimes is people form the impression that if you declare a major earlier, that the better. So, why don't we have them declare them in 10th grade? But actually, there's a pretty good piece of research that came out last year that said that students actually do best if they declare their major in their second or third semester. Somebody this morning made reference to a learning community for students who might be interested in health. And so many times, you'll have 800 students who want to go into nursing and maybe 100 will get in. So why not put them all in the learning community so they can study that overall range of pre-health options and give them some time, like our Ethnographies of Work course. You can do some of those same sorts of things in a first-year seminar where students can explore what they want to do.
Well, for us, we have new students come in, and they do meet with an advisor. Our academies are fairly broad: business, VAPA, health-related sciences, STEM, liberal arts and science, liberal arts. And we have about at least a third of our degree credits, and there's 60, roughly 60, unless it's an external accreditation, are Gen Ed. So there's a fair number of ways they can go in common and not get too off the track if they change their mind. That is kind of important. It's always interesting when they say they want to work with computers, because we have the business side, we have the engineering technology side, and we have the computer science side in the mathematics department. So listening to students is rather important, and I don't think that they all have the level of sophistication to articulate in our language what they want to do. But if you ask them what they want to do, how they want to use information, what would they like to do in terms of working, you can pull a little bit more information. And of course, we do have the orientation course, et cetera, that we build on. But it is interesting because many of them are first-generation college, so it is a little, it's foreign. I mean, I always tease and say, when's the last time in our regular lives we use the word bursar? I mean, we have a vocabulary that's kind of bizarre in higher ed. So a lot of it is listening to our students and trying to stay abreast with what they are saying or thinking.
Just, Scott, about the optimal time to choose a major. The only thing I would say about that is that the optimal time to choose a major in a current situation where you're not given much help, or where the model is you have many options, many courses that you can take, and you're going to sample those courses, stumble around among them maybe is a way to think about that. So I would think that a well-organized system for helping students choose. I think that a lot of times the objection to a more structured or guided pathway is that don't we want students to choose? Isn't that the purpose of going to college? And the answer that we usually give to that is, well, we want students to choose, but we want to make sure we help them in the best way possible. And I don't think that offering many courses for them to take because their friend took that course or because this happens to be consistent with their work schedule or they don't like to get up early, those kinds of ways of deciding about courses probably aren't the best way. So that would be, I think if we could repeat that research with your system or with other more organized systems, and also with, we've heard about P-TECH this morning, I do think it's important to try to get students thinking about this earlier than just when they show up to college. And I would think we might find a different result from the research in that way.
I'd like to ask a question, if I can, which deals with the question of the establishment of community colleges as institutions. And when these institutions came into being, the organization and culture of those institutions, in many respects, was modeled after the traditional four-year institutions with hierarchical structures and faculty governance and other factors that really were modeled after the institutions that were the predecessor institutions. But on each one of the three of you who have spoken, you've talked about dynamic, different types of institutions where there's tremendous amounts of engagement and conversations and dialogue about what's happening to students across the span of the institution. So my question is, how much of effort is it taking to change organizational culture and tradition to get the institutions acting in more ways similar to what it is that you're saying students need in order to be successful?
My friend John Gardner, who created Foundations of Excellence, said if you want to make change in institution, you have to have a support from the top and a structure to do the work. And I always remember him saying that. And at my former institution, we doubled the graduation rate by creating a university college so there was somebody to take ownership of the first year. And in my present institution, we don't have any traditional academic departments. We want all the faculty in programs and teach in their specialty, but we want everybody to remain grounded in the first year, because one of the big problems is that the full-time faculty, as one of the speakers said this morning, have largely abandoned the first year to adjuncts, part-timers, and lecturers. And so part of our being different is to keep the full-time faculty fully in ownership of the first year.
I think they didn't call us junior colleges for nothing. I mean, we do have that mimetic quality of university. But as Tom writes, curriculum, the structure, the traditional structure is very difficult to change. We've gone at it in a different way, which is to have our faculty lead that conversation and that change. And I think that the newer faculty are more open to it. We're at about 56% full-time instruction, and we hope to be better. Many of our new faculty are still on that reassigned time. But that to me is important, and we've all talked as colleagues about the need for consistency, even using adjuncts. We've very much involved our adjuncts in every opportunity for faculty development, and that is really quite important because we all have a significant number of members of the contingent faculty.
So just a comment about the model. I mean, yes, I suppose to some extent it was modeled off the traditional model, but there were some things that were forgotten, like the resources, or maybe the students that come in with the kinds of backgrounds that. I mean, it's one thing for a student who has been sort of marinated in a college-going culture for their entire life to be presented with with a bunch of options and asked to choose their major by their junior year. I mean, actually, I think that that elite selective colleges are in fact much more structured than we think they are, and they have a lot more assistance that's provided to those students. I mean, if at Columbia, if you get a C, the professor gets a visit from an advisor about what's going on with this student getting a C. So I don't think that in some sense, the sort of, we get some of the weaknesses of the traditional structure without a lot of the benefits and strengths that would come with more resources and a different type of student. So I don't, I mean, when you think about, if your idea is that students are going to take 2 years to kind of figure out what they're going to do, that's all they are at a community college. And so, in fact, what you get are these unorganized general education programs. I mean, I know a college where you get 60 credits of anything and you'll get a degree. That lets them get their financial aid, but I'm not sure that that's doing them a very good service to, giving them something that's really going to be useful and that will transfer. So I think that I think that idea that isn't that what we're doing with these other students, and why do we want something different from community colleges, is sort of distorted in a variety of ways and isn't really either an accurate picture of what the situation is or a very good roadmap for moving forward.
I'd like to ask one last question, if I can, and it really deals with finances. I mean, how do our institutions get the resources that they need in order to do what needs to be done? And Tom, in your book, you in fact say that it's likely that to do this, to provide the services that we're talking about here today, that really will benefit the types of students who are finding their ways into our institutions, are likely to cost more. And if that's the case, what's the value proposition? How do we frame the conversation in such a way that as we talk to policymakers, philanthropists, and leaders in our states and in our regions, what suggestions do you give to us relative to how we present ourselves in such a way as to get the resources necessary to achieve the challenge that we've been asked to undertake?
So, well, I think there's a bunch of different ways. I mean, I do think there are some reallocations. The city colleges of Chicago have done significant redesign without additional resources, and they found management efficiencies or inefficiencies that they were, you could argue that it was a pretty inefficient system, so there was some low-hanging fruit with respect to sort of redesign and a reallocation of money. If we have a lot of programs that don't have a lot of students, I think there are various ways to think about that, about reallocation. Now, I do think that it's reasonable to say that if we're going to get better outcomes, we may need to invest more money. And I think that Donna could give the example of ASAP, which is it's more costly per enrollment, but it's cheaper per outcome. Mm-hmm. So I think there's one way and this is a way to talk about to talk about this with legislators or the public, which is to say that if you're going to focus on cost per enrollment, what you're going to get is more adjuncts, they're cheaper, bigger classes, we've been shown that's certainly not something that community colleges want, and people are going to go to online education because they think it's cheaper, and perhaps you would disagree, but I think high quality online education isn't a way to get cheap education. So emphasize enrollments, and you get three types of reforms that actually lead to worse student outcomes. I think the ASAP example is, they've shown they've been much more effective. The cost per completion goes down. That means they get more resources. So I think, both the kind of moral argument or the economic argument that we need to have a stronger educated workforce to be successful, and then the kind of efficiency argument, which says that maybe this is going to cost more per enrollment, but it's going to be cheaper for the outcomes that we want. I think those arguments will, in some cases, I think we've seen examples where those have been successful. I'm sure they won't always be successful, but I think we have to keep working on that. I just one more thing. I don't think we don't really have the luxury of continuing to do what we've done in the past. Yes. Because not only is there more fiscal constraint, but there are other things about, I think, the requirements for being in a program that will give your students eligibility for Pell are going to go up. So it's going to be more difficult to define. I don't think the future of here's a 60 credit program, any credit is going to allow those students to be eligible for Pell. So I think all of those, the increasing cost of college, the increasing political situation, those make it imperative, I think, that we have the kind of reforms that's going to significantly improve the outcomes that we have.
I agree with that statement entirely. and I think most of us probably do. Let me just say that this has been a wonderful conversation. To the three presidents, your institutions all sound fantastic. I wish when I was a young person I could have gone to any one of the three of them. I'd be a great success today. Your book is absolutely wonderful. I encourage everyone to get the book. It's filled with lots of good information and a lot of guidance and best practices that we can all share. So let's give our panel a good hand. We have some